when you look at it, New Zealand isn't exactly a burgeoning example, is it, of the free market? Wherever you look, there is market failure. And the whole point about the free market is competition, the opportunity of giving choice to the consumer. And that is meant to, in actual fact, make the economic system much more efficient and, frankly, available to the consumer. Not at the moment. So, I'm just saying, New Zealand's a small country. We wouldn't have this problem so much if we were living in Australia. We wouldn't have this problem so much if we were living in the United States or the United Kingdom or Europe. But we're not, And at that stage you ask yourself, and I think it's a fair question to ask, does the free market really serve New Zealand's best interests or purposes? There's 5 million of us. Well, less than 5 million according to the census, because guess what? They didn't do it properly again. There's less than 5 million of us officially. We are a small country stuck down at the bottom of the southeast of the Pacific. We are a long, thin country, so there's no natural synergies when it comes to public transport. So we've got to drive a car or a truck or something. We've got to drive something. It's a long way from all of our markets, and if people want to come to New Zealand to visit us, it's a long way and an expensive way for them too. Just asking, is democracy, no, not democracy, democracy's a great thing. Now, is the free market really working in this country the way it's meant to? And if you look at all the monopolies that are existent in New Zealand at the moment, where small players have been squeezed out by the big ones, where there is no effective competition, and we are getting absolutely raped and reamed by a whole bunch of unscrupulous individuals and not individuals. Well, yes, I suppose the individuals work for the companies, don't they? But a whole series of unscrupulous monopolists. This is what happened in the 19th century in America. Happened in the 19th century in New Zealand with land. And what happened in both countries? Antitrust legislation in the United States, which broke up the railways and a great deal of, and ensured that there was competition. And this government, a Liberal government, coming in under a chap by the name of Seddon. Oh yeah, everybody seems to forget him. Longest serving Prime Minister in New Zealand, I think. Comes into this country and breaks up land to make sure it's available for everybody and not just the squattocracy. So I'm just asking. And local government, which is stuff full of incompetent fools as a general people. I mean, nobody bright works in local government. It's the post office of the 21st century. But, and here's the but, they've got a monopoly. They don't have to be efficient or effective. They don't have to give you a good service. They can give you the finger on a regular basis. They do. In fact, they make a proctologist examination seem absolutely pleasurable by comparison, local government. But, guess what? I know. There they are. And soon you are going to have rates demands dropping into your letterboxes or through your email, and bang, you're going to go, oh my God. I know. That's a grim way to start, isn't it? It's the 1st of July, so I'm allowed to be grim. It's the middle of winter. It's the winter of our discontent. It's not showing up at them. We know how bad it is. And although we might like to blame Chippy and the fairy dust girl, the truth of the matter is, or look at Christopher Luxon and say, you useless bastard, you just Labour light, which you could be saying in a pub over your second beer. Listen, the truth of the matter is it's the system, just quietly. The problem is the lack of competition. The free market in this country is not working the way it should do. I don't know. It's easy enough to break up the supermarkets. You just need a bit of guts. It's easy enough to break up Air New Zealand's monopoly, except the government has a sort of, what's the word? It has an excuse not to, doesn't it? Because it likes the dividend. See? And all those stiffy people who work at Air New Zealand, you know the ones I mean, the ones you strike, actually not in the provincial centres as a general rule, you strike them in the main centres, particularly Wellington. Wellington's full of stiffy people.
Wellington and Auckland are the worst.
All those stiffy people, can I just say, they go into those monopolies. They're drawn to them in exactly the same way that I imagine in the 20th century, in the early 20th century, people were drawn to organisations that had interesting uniforms, a very interesting way of walking, and quite like to congregate with lots of flags. You know, I just wonder if the same personalities aren't at play almost 100 years later. Having said that, as I talk to you now, there is a bit of a reaction all throughout the Western world, because only the Western world gets democracy, or some sort of ruminant of it, impractical and imperfect as it might be. But in the Western world at the moment, there is a rejection to a large extent of the politics of wokery. All but in one country. I'll come to that in a second. But as I talk to you now, the exit polls have just come from the first round of French voting. They show the National Rally, led by Marine Le Pen, which has always been considered anathematic, is in actual fact the largest party. It's going to end up with, well, the exit polls are projecting 34%, or roughly, of the vote. The New Popular Front, which is a whole group of lefties, so they're every bit as left as Marine Le Pen is right, can I just say. They've ended up with 28%. It's really interesting, the French. I like the French. They are extremely arrogant. They don't give a rat's ass about anybody else. If you're in their country and you can't speak French, deservedly, and if you're wearing a hijab and you want to cover your face with something, they don't like that. They smoke like anything. They run away at the very prospect of a war. Quite smart. It's better to be a live cow than a dead hero. And they just wait and osmotically absorb any of their invaders anyhow. So they're really quite clever, the French. Like them a lot. In fact, I love the French. I love the French. Wonderful. If it wasn't for the French, the English wouldn't know how to cook. And they don't, but at least they've absorbed some of it. They pop across the channel and go, oh gosh, this is real food. Let's try and take that back. Well, take that sauce back, Ron. And then unfortunately the sauce goes on over everything. It doesn't matter. At least the English are sort of by bit learning to cook. No. The National Rally, which is the centre-right, sort of more right than centre-right, actual fact, 34% of the vote. New Popular Front, which is more left than centre-left, you'd have to say it's 28%. Macron's group, President Macron, 20%. God, boy, they got to 60% once. The Republicans got 10%. Now, what happens to the French? Because the French are different, aren't they? I mean, the French are different. French kissing. You know, there's a whole series of stuff and way the French get horizontal. Boy, they get horizontal. No, while they're smoking. No, I know. It's quite a feat, really. Date a Frenchman or a French woman, you'll understand what I mean. I will say no more. The point that I'm saying about the French this morning is that they have two runoffs. So they have two elections. They've just had the election over the weekend that's come up with this first round of results. And then they have a second election next Saturday in which, I know, now New Zealand couldn't do that. New Zealand couldn't run two elections in 2 weeks. Impossible. You know, just stuff it up. I mean, for God's sake, just imagine Don Tamahiri and Te Pāti Maori. They go mad. I mean, it was just beyond us. But not the French, you see. And the French next week, I think it's next week or the week after, they're going to have a second election in which there's a runoff between the two top. So, for example, let's say you're living in Napier and Katie Nimmin and whoever the Labour candidate was that they parachuted in at the last moment, neither of them gets 50% of the vote. I don't know if Katie Nimmin or not, but they then run off against each other so that one of them ends up with 50%. Now, obviously, if in the seats in which somebody's already ended up with 50% of the vote, then there won't be a runoff. But all throughout France, there'll be a second election for these runoff elections. And then finally, the composition of the Parliamentary Assembly over there will be determined. No, so that's happening there, right? The Liberal National Party is back on the way, the centre-right, in Australia. And Albanese, he's only been in there, about the same time Jacinda Ardern was. No, less time than that. He'd be on his way out if there's an election tomorrow. Trudeau in Canada, extraordinarily unpopular. If there's an election today, he'd be gone. In fact, he'd be in Scandinavia, the socialist liberal paradises that all socialist liberals in this country like to extol. Huge moves in Denmark, Norway and Sweden to the centre-right and to the right. So there is these massive movements to the right in Europe and now in France as well. There's one exception. Do you know what that exception is? Britain. Yeah, Conservatives are going to get absolutely pummeled. What does all this mean for us? Bugger all, except you would think that in Europe, you would think in the United States in particular, you'd think in Canada, and you'd think in Australia, all of those centre-right parties are instinctively more our country first, bugger you second, which means that they're likely to become more protectionist, less open to trade. And New Zealand's great belief that while we dance naked in the world, everybody else should be as well, will be again tested. Roger Douglas got it wrong, and so have a whole series of politicians over the last 30, 40 years in this country. Countries are inherently motivated by self-interest. All this bollocks about there being an international free market in agricultural goods is just that. Bollocks. And there's New Zealand dancing out there and naked. Oh, God, look at us. No clothes on. Here we go. Look how wonderful and virtuous we are, including on our emissions trading scheme. The rest of the world just looks at us and go, a bit odd, aren't they, those Kiwis? They are bloody mad. Listen, is there something, should we commit? Nah, just let them go. They'll give away their economy bit by bit. We'll own them soon enough.